How's everybody doing? Good to see all of you. My name is Hayden Pedigo. I'm from Amarillo, Texas, and today I released an album. It's an album called I'll Be Waving As You Drive Away. What's funny is in 2021, I had never toured and I had barely played any shows. And I had put out a record called Letting Go, and the very first show I played was here at End of an Ear. It was one of the very first shows I had ever played on a tour at all. And I remember that night specifically because we had to wear a mask on stage. I got up, and my hands were shaking so bad with nerves. And then because of the mask, my glasses were fogging up, and I couldn't see. And my glasses fell, and I couldn't even play the song I was trying to play. It was a complete train wreck, and I was very embarrassed. So I had the idea to come back and embarrass myself again, but this time hopefully with less nerves. We'll see what happens. I'm going to be playing some new songs for y'all. This first one, it's one from this new record. It's called Smoked. I was inspired by, there's this group called Popol Vuh. They scored movies by the director Werner Herzog back in the 70s, and I wanted to write a piece of music like they did. So I'm gonna give it a shot. I really appreciate all of you coming out and cramming into this record store. I see so many friends here. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you all so much. So this new album, it ends what I call the Motor Trilogy. I talked about that record, Letting Go. That's where it began. It's called the Motor Trilogy because all three of these records have a vehicle on them. Letting Go has me standing in front of an 18-wheeler in corpse paint. It was based on a real photo of me when I lived in Lubbock, Texas. There was one day, there's nothing to do in Lubbock. It's a really boring town. But there was a day that I put on corpse paint and went to Arby's. And afterwards, that was real. Afterwards, there was an 18-wheeler in a parking lot, and my wife took a photo of me standing in front of it. A friend painted it. It became the album cover. The next record was called The Happiest Times Ever Ignored, and it was a painting of me standing in front of a burning Nissan in a Walmart parking lot. And then this record ends with me in a 70s Chevy Silverado. I'm not sure what I'm in front of on that one, though. It's a sign of me. But I'm wrapping up the series of albums that has kind of been me telling the story of my life over the past 5 years. And I was thinking about it recently that these records, and especially this new one, I'll Be Waving As You Drive Away, it kind of has to do with how we were always in a constant state of leaving. I've been thinking about this a lot, the idea of like moving away from your hometown, leaving friends and family behind, or losing a loved one. And this idea that you can't really hold on to anything. We're always in the state of moving all the time. And it's, I guess, me trying to come to acceptance with that. I have a hard time accepting that I can't just sit still and I can't make things sit still with me. This next song, it's a song of mine from this new record. It's called Long Pond Lily. It's one of the hardest songs I've ever written, and I've had some difficulties playing it live sometimes. The first time I ever played it was a complete train wreck, but I never learned my lesson, so I'm going to try it again. This is Long Pond Lily. I'm going to try it and just see what happens. Thank you all so much. Yeah, it's really nice to be here. And it's really cool playing here the day my album comes out. It's always the scariest day when you put out a record. I always forget every time that I put an album out that I have to like see how people perceive it, what they think of it. I mean, everyone's been so nice about this record, and it's cool to finally share it with people. Because the other day someone asked me, they said, how do your songs tell stories if there's not lyrics? And I was trying to think about it, because when I write these songs, what's strange is they originally don't have a direct story that I'm writing about. I'm just composing based off of a mood I'm in. And then the story kind of comes to me later, and I said, these songs are kind of pieces of context for events that haven't happened to me. They're things that like later on in my life something will happen and I'll be like, wait, that's what that song was about. And that's kind of one of the cool things about instrumental music is the meaning of it doesn't have to be immediate. I can find it later. And I've had times at shows where people have walked up to me afterwards at the merch table and they've said, I feel like this is what that song's about. And I think about it, I'm like, yeah, you're right. And I never knew that. So if you ever think my song's about something, don't be afraid to tell me, because you might be right and I just might not know it yet. This next song, I'm gonna tune to a different tuning real quick. This is I always say it's the scariest thing is having to tune up in front of people. I usually have a joke about a VR headset video game called Panic Attack Simulator, but tonight I'm not gonna tell it. This next song, it's a song of mine called Houndstooth. It's from this new record, and when I wrote it, my idea was I wanted to write the perfect John Fahey song. And I realized that that's impossible. You can't write the perfect John Fahey song because only he could do that. But I was inspired by classic 60s Fahey records and also a 50s vocal group called the Platters. They did songs like Twilight Time and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. That's like what my grandparents listened to. But I was really into that kind of zone. So I'm gonna try to play this song. I'm just gonna tune real quick, just bear with me. Thank you all so much. So I think I have time to play one more tune for y'all. This one, there's kind of a story behind it. This next song, it's the title track to the new album. It's called I'll Be Waving As You Drive Away. Some of y'all may already know this, but that title comes from a 1978 episode of the show Little House on the Prairie. Has anyone ever seen that show? Yeah. A couple of people. I was homeschooled, and I don't know if y'all know this, but in Texas, legally you have to watch that show to graduate high school. I'm completely serious. That's not a joke. But this episode, it was an Emmy-winning episode, and it's widely considered to be one of the greatest episodes of TV ever written, and I highly recommend watching this episode called I'll Be Waving If You Drive Away If You Can. It's a two-parter, but it's one of those episodes that ever since I was a kid, it's made me cry. It's a two-parter about in Little House on the Prairie. Obviously, it's set during the Western cowboy days, but the oldest daughter, Mary Ingalls, she loses her eyesight, she goes blind, and her family has to send her estate over to the school for the blind. Over the course of the two-part episode, she falls in love with the head of the school. He's also blind. Weirdly, the actor that plays him is the guy that wrote and directed Malcolm in the Middle. Really weird. That's like the weirdest connection. At the end of the two-parter, Mary has to go back home to be with her family. They have to take her out of the school. And she's heartbroken because she's fallen in love with this man. And at the end, it's very soap opera, kind of melodramatic, but they're standing in front of the schoolhouse as her family's like waiting there in the covered wagon. And it's very emotional, but they're crying, and he says to her, because they're both blind, he says, I'll be waving as you drive away. I don't know why, still to this day, that's always stuck with me. There's something deeply heavy and tragic, and it gets me still to this day. But I watched the show again, and my wife told me, she said, why don't you name an album that? And I was like, that's brilliant. I never would have thought to name that. And I got on Google, I looked up, I was like, somebody has to have named an album that already. No one had named an album that yet, and I was shocked. So I named the album I'll Be Waving As You Drive Away. The song's really special to me. I think it might be my favorite song I've ever written. I might be hyping it up a little too much. I want to say thanks to End of an Ear for having me. I love playing this store, and I'm so glad I was able to come back and redeem myself from that 2021 performance. That was a rough one, but this feels a lot nicer, a lot warmer, and I feel like I'm just hanging with friends. This is the perfect way to celebrate an album coming out. I didn't want to do a normal show. I wanted to do something like this. This feels cool. It's so good to see y'all. Thank y'all for coming out and listening. I appreciate y'all. My name is Hayden Pedigo. I'm from Amarillo, Texas. Thanks for coming out. Come buy a shirt.